Greetings, upstanders. Dr. O here, and I just finished listening to a very lengthy interview on a Morning Joe with Scott Galloway, who's an entrepreneur, who's an author, who's a professor. Most people, who are in this field know his work, and he has been very passionate about saving men in our society. And he has a new book out. It's called Notes on Being a Man by Scott Galloway. And the discussion was about things that need to be done in our society to better take care of men. Now, to be clear, I agree with many of the principles that are in this book as it relates to men. I'm raising I have two daughters. My oldest are teenagers in their late teens. I'm also, my wife and I are raising a son who is a fifth grader and is 11 years old. So I'm very interested in about the conversation about men and boys and so on and so forth. So on that level, I appreciate much of what Scott Galloway is doing and saying. Some of the things that he talks about in the book, when you look at some of the principles, I haven't read the book yet. I'm on the website, the Simon and Schuster website. They say, they talk about the importance of. He says, you got to get out of the house, and he said, action absorbs anxiety. I think that's very powerful. It says, take risk and be willing to feel like an take risk and be willing to feel like an imposter. Don't let rejection stop you. I get that. Keep going. Don't give up. Be kind. That's the secret to success in relationships. Talks about find what you're good at, follow your talent, acknowledge your blessings, and create opportunities for others. Be of surplus value. Being a good man means being good to the mother of your children. There's no doubt. Life isn't about what happens to you, it's about how you respond to it. And there's a lot of other things that he talks about. He talks about the importance of mentorship and how, men need to get involved in the lives of young people. And so there's a lot of things in there that are powerful. And I definitely plan on looking at this book. But every time I listen to Scott Galloway, there's always something missing. There always seems to be something missing from his conversation. And to be quite honest, he seems to be, when he talks about a lot of the problems that men face in this country, particularly as it relates to violence, a lot of it is mainly white men. A lot of it is mainly white men. And I don't know if he gets to this in his book. It doesn't seem like it from this lengthy discussion of what I've been reading so far in the book. But he doesn't want to disaggregate that. And he and more, and Joe Scarborough was doing the same thing. Now, towards the end of the interview, Joe Scarborough, mentioned, because I'll get to this part later, but he says, Scott Galloway says, Joe, you and I, because of what we've experienced, we have a debt to pay. We owe to society from what we've been able to experience and live with and gain from our society. And Joe's like, absolutely, absolutely. But black men didn't have that same experience then and opportunities that Scott Galloway talks about regularly. Scott Galloway has talked about, being basically born at the right time and being the right race and being a man. Like, he talks about that as it relates to his trajectory, but then he'll say things like, which is what he said today in the interview, we can't hold a 19-year-old male accountable for the advantages that he and Joe Scarborough received. That's talking about white men. That's not talking about all men. 19-year-old black men, 19-year-old Latinos. Like, have you heard of ICE? Like, Latinos, they're not balling. You know what I mean? And the 60, 70-year-old plus black men who grew up with your time, Joe Scarborough and Scott Galloway, had a whole different set of experiences. Yes, are there many black men who are that age who are successful? Of course. But my point is, this also leads to another point that he said. He said he went to the DNC's website and he looked at their platform, and he said he saw like 17 different categories of people that they're looking to protect. And he didn't see anything about men, but more specifically, you have to say he didn't see anything about white men. And he said that if you're serving 74% of the population, you're discriminating against the other 26%, which basically means he's talking about males, and in my opinion, he's talking about white males. All of the communities that the DNC is looking to serve, whether it's LGBTQ, he said they talked about AAPI community, talked about the indigenous community. All of those communities have men in them. So, there's this weird that dichotomy that people like to talk about or look at, like with Scott Galloway. It's like, if you decide that you're going to serve, the AAPI community, if you decide that you're going to serve the LGBTQ community, if you decide you're going to, serve these groups, then all of a sudden, for some reason, you're discriminating against men. I'm looking at the DNC's platform right now. Some of the groups they look to support, obviously, is women's rights, reproductive freedom. That's obviously women, but they have LGBTQ here. Disability. Are there men who are experiencing disabilities? I think so. Tribal nations. Like so that needs to be disaggregated if I'm going to, really take a lot of what he says, more seriously. He said the DNC is too focused on special interest groups. Are black people a special interest group? And it seems, are Latinos a special interest group? Indigenous communities, LGBTQ? It seems like there's an argument to say that the special interest group needs to be men, and particularly white men. And one of the things that Joe did in this interview, if you watch it, is he went down all of the list of the violence that has been happening, whether it's Charlie Kirk, whether it's Minnesota, whether it was the man who drove his truck into a church and started shooting up Mormons, and he ran down all of the list. All of these people are white males, all of them, and several of them, many of them, and I could say from the ones that Joe cited, the majority of them are tied to MAGA. Like that needs to be looked at as well. And so every time I hear Scott Galloway talk about the crisis of men, I appreciate so many of his solutions, and I appreciate his passion, and I appreciate his energy towards this and his research. But a good portion of it seems to be we need to coddle men more, and we need to stop paying attention to these other groups and ignoring men. I believe that there is a good conversation to be had about some of the DNC pop or some people in liberal spaces, and this idea of everything is about toxic masculinity and you, the man, are the problem. I don't agree with that entirely in terms of how he phrases it, but there's a conversation to be had there about how sometimes the finger gets pointed at men, but we also have to be mindful of the fact that many times men deserve the fingers to be pointed at them. And one of the things that I don't hear enough from Scott in the videos I watch and the conversations and the like is I don't hear enough about accountability from the men who are struggling right now, or just men in general who are having problems and challenges. Everything that he talks about how men tend to be able to once a man leaves their lives, whether through death or divorce and so on and so forth, 4 times likely to commit suicide. All of those things are real. And this is areas I do work in and I'm very passionate about, but there doesn't seem to be a real accountability piece for the actions of men. And that needs to be looked at, and that needs to be dissected. There's a certain level of coddling that I feel like he's asking for to happen towards men, and I would say when you look at the stats, particularly white men, that he doesn't believe other groups should have, or he believes has been happening for too long for other groups at the expense of men. Well, so much has been built on this country for white men at the expense of everybody else. And so, again, nobody on the panel, Pablo Torre, was the only non-white person who was on the panel, as it relates to the conversation, and he didn't bring this up. Again, Joe Scarborough, towards the end, he said he realized that as a 6'4" white guy who came up with means that he was gonna be all right, and I appreciated him saying that part, but that was it. In a country where everything has been built on race, like there needs to be some more, and I wish Scott Galloway would do more of that. The fact of the matter is that yes, there are issues of black men, Latino, Asian men, indigenous men as well. The issues of not having access to friends, or being loners, and social media culture and gaming culture and all of those things. Those are things that apply to our communities as well. There's no question about it. But when we talk about how this stuff starts to manifest into the public space, right? As it relates to violence, as it relates to a lot of the misogyny and things that are out there, these are things that are happening primarily by white men and young white men. And I think that when I read this book called, I want to look up the authors because I thought it was really powerful. this book called Influencer: The Power to Change Anything, which I read years ago by Joseph Grenny, David Maxfield, Kerry Patterson, Ron McMillan, and Al Switzer. One of the things I appreciated about this book is that their theory was, and it came out in 2007. I don't know if there have been updates. It said if you challenge, if you target the group that is struggling the most and develop solutions specifically for them, you can deal with the larger population. So they gave an example of, malaria in a Ugandan community, and they had all of these campaigns, education campaigns, posters, and all of this other type of stuff about what people can do to end malaria, but nothing was changing. So what they decided to do was they targeted the women who were getting the water from the rivers and taught them safer water practices, because obviously their water was feeding the whole community and rates of malaria went down. He talked about Thailand, where AIDS was on the rise at a particular time, and they had these campaigns, celebrities, commercials, radio ads. Nothing was happening. What they decided to do was target the sex workers in these communities and teach them safer sex practices, and that helped they calm down. So what I'm saying is there needs to be more of a target on what's happening with white males in this society, and develop real programs to target that, which includes also accountability for actions that are taking place. And by developing those solutions, it will help the broader male crisis that he's talking about in general. And so, as powerful as his work is, as passionate as he is about what he's doing, and a lot of his solutions I agree with, if that particular piece isn't looked at, this idea that we can't just blame men, I will say what young white men, for the advantages that y'all have as older men. Those advantages didn't come to all men; they came to white men. Like, why can't that be looked at? And when I think of the way so many of these, young white men get coddled, whether we're looking at insurrectionists being pardoned, whether we're looking at people like, the rapist Brock Turner, whether we're looking at all of these actions, the affluenza case, where, a kid, killed like 6 people in a car accident, but because he was drunk, but they said, well, because of the benefits he received in life, his being spoiled, this kind of led to it, and he got a light sentence, and which he violated later. Like, I can run down the list of ways that these guys get coddled in ways other men don't. And that's a really important issue that needs to be discussed. And so I knew where Scott Galloway was going to go. I knew what was going to happen. He almost seems mad at society because of the attention it has put on other marginalized and disadvantaged groups that have been that way for centuries in this country. And to say that, as he said, and I may get the numbers off by a percentage or two, but his words were, if you're serving 74% of the population, you're discriminating against the other 26%. And then he talked about something which I didn't fully catch. I got to go back and check the interview. He talked about, like, ideas of manhood, are doing great in Israel because everybody has mandatory, like, national service that the men have to be involved in as well. And there's more camaraderie and access to different groups. And then I'm like, okay, but damn, but you're also complicit in a genocide. You're also committing genocide. So how does that balance work out, right? As it relates to Palestine. And so, like, I gotta do a little deeper dive in that. I don't know if what's happening right now in terms of Palestine, Gaza, leads the IDF to be, or Israel to be the place where you want to highlight the best examples of manhood. Because one of the things you said about manhood is about taking care, looking after each other. Look what's happening to non-Jewish people who are in Israel, right? And look what's happening in Palestine, and look what's happening with Gaza, through this Netanyahu government, and which, from what I can tell, many Jewish people in Israel do not support the actions of this government. And again, I'm separating between the government of Israel and the Jewish people. And so I would love you all's thoughts on this. Like I said, I do agree that these issues relating to men are real. Loneliness, and he was talking about, like, the availability of porn and how it affects their ability to have real relationships and all of that. Again, these are things that all men have to deal with, and are real challenges. But I believe that it wasn't fully honest in terms of which young men are the biggest perpetrators of violence in the public space. We talked about the access to the types of weapons and guns, those types of access to those types of weapons and guns, the AR-15s and all of that. Many people within the non-white male community don't have easy access to. So I think that needs to be talked about as well. Um, and I just believe that we need to do that in order to take this conversation to a deeper, more honest level. Outside of that, I respect his passion. I respect the conversation that was had. I respect what was talked about in terms of tech bros and all of these guys who are whining and complaining. I respect what he said about the obligation for men to be able to get back into their communities and be mentors, especially, the kids who aren't their own as well. But there's this piece about accountability for young white men that needs to be addressed in a way that doesn't coddle them and holds them accountable. Like Dr. King said, you can't legislate morality, but you can regulate behavior. And that's something I always see that always seems to be missing when I hear Scott Galloway's conversations. So I look forward to checking out his book. I would love to know what your thoughts on as it relates to these conversations about men. And I believe that we have to be able to do some of these things without and not at the expense of honoring and recognizing the powerful things that women are doing, which he recognized as well. But I think there's a nuance here that wasn't really struck. All right, let me know what y'all think. Hit that like and subscribe button. Let's get to 25,000 subscribers. I'd appreciate it, and share this with anyone if you feel like it's relevant. Take care. Peace.